In this episode of The Future of Political Consulting, AAPC Director of Advocacy, Julie Sweet, speaks with Mary Coller Albert, a principal from Dewey Square Group's digital practice, about the emerging world of GEO, Generative Engine Optimization, and what it could mean for campaigns heading into the 2026 midterms and beyond. As voters increasingly rely on AI-powered search tools, chatbots, and conversational platforms for information, campaigns and consultants face new questions about how candidates, issues, and organizations are represented in AI-generated answers. Here's Julie Sweet with Mary Coller Albert to answer those questions.
Hi, everyone. Just so glad to have you all with us today. So my name is Julie Sweet. So glad to be here with you. And one of the reasons why I love my job working at the AAPC is that I get to talk with so many practitioners who are really at the forefront of AI adoption and thinking about what this new technology means for the industry more broadly. Today, I'm going to talk with Mary Coller Albert with the Dewey Square Group about something I think a lot of us are still trying to wrap our heads around, and that is how AI is changing the information environment, and with it, how voters are accessing that information and how it's influencing their behavior. So as many of you have probably noticed on your Google app now, is that when a voter asks their favorite LLM about a candidate, an issue, or a ballot measure, they're no longer just getting a list of links, but they're actually getting an answer. So today, LLMs are now creating and curating information and really changing the way that people are starting to consume it. So we're going to dig into what GEO is, what makes it work, and what can and can't be controlled from the outside, and what this means for all of us going forward. So, Mary, you've been taking a hard look at this through your research and with your clients. So first, tell us kind of how you came to the topic, and then before we get into the research, I want to ask a few table setting questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Julie. It's great to be here. Yeah, we really came to this working from a public affairs perspective and looking at digital, as I've been a part of for many years, and finding that, again, with all of these models having these AI answers, really what was feeding that information. This wasn't just a typical Google search that you're getting links to, but you're actually getting synthesized answers. So that led us to really trying to question, where is this information coming from? How is it being fed? And how is it being synthesized?
All right, so I introduced a little bit of an acronym. There are a lot of acronyms now to try to get at what this concept is, but for consultants who may be hearing the term GEO or just thinking about what this is, what are we talking about?
Yeah, it's a lot of acronyms out there right now. And
Yeah.
it seems to have fallen into the GEO, which stands for Generative Engine Optimization, which is similar to SEO, which is Search Engine Optimization. And with SEO, you're optimizing for a search engine. And GEO being you're optimizing for generative research from these AI LLMs, these models. So that's the difference. And really, when GEO is really about getting ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity, Claude, all of these to be able to optimize to your content, get your content optimized for that and for those bots.
In your research, you have a few numbers, but why should political consultants who are thinking engaged in 2026 elections now, primaries are happening, voters are plugging in questions into their LLMs today, why do they need to care about this?
Yeah, because voters aren't just Googling anymore, right? They're going into each one of these LLMs and asking questions. And so if your content isn't optimized for these engines, it's basically not going to be found, and it isn't going to come up.
Okay, so you dug in on your research. Can you outline a little bit of what the project was and some of the major findings?
Yeah, sure. So this is where we were looking at if and are there any ideological skewing bias inside of these what we call LLMs, and we keep talking about that's large language models. And those AI models are created in a way where they are built on a knowledge base. And we wanted to find out where does that knowledge base come from? And what we did find was that a lot of these models were built up to a certain point, and we can talk a little bit more about that, about the cutoff dates. And then they also crawl, what we call crawling the web, for information that is more up to date. And what we found is that nearly 80% of the major news organizations and publications are actually blocked to these crawlers. And some of them have done deals with specific companies with specific models, and some of them haven't. And also that some of the websites that are open and available, in fact, the majority that we found that are available to crawlers, lean more towards the conservative ideological skew. So in fact, that what we found was that about 50% of the actual websites that are available are giving the lowest factual information to these knowledge bases for all of these engines. And we did quite a few tests, and we looked at 27 different crawlers, because there are different kinds of AI crawlers. And also we went through about 150 different news outlets and checked each one of them, and then looked at all the recent deals. Again, our study was done in February. Most of the research was done towards the end of 2025 and the beginning of 2026. So there might have been some more recent deals. But really what we found was that most of the deals were done for specific news outlets, and we don't have any information about what information is actually, licensed to these models. There's no transparency there.
So we don't know what's going into them, how they're prioritizing them, and how they're using that information to create.
That's right. Yes, it's a big black hole.
Okay. So what does that mean for practitioners?
Yeah. Well, I
guess maybe we can spend a little bit of time on some of those details, because you had a lot of kind of early parts, and we can talk about what it all means. But you had talked about cutoff dates and crawlers and training data. What is the different stages, I guess, of information gathering that leads to the output?
Right. So when they formed these models, each model was based on a specific amount of information. Over the years, obviously, Google and the bigger tech companies have been scraping the internet, so to speak, and actually gathering information and formulating knowledge based on that information. And each one of these models has, and again, we don't know some of them we do know, some of them we don't. Back in 2020, some of these models came out with what they call model cards, where they gave a little bit of information about which crawlers they use, but they stopped putting them out as they updated each one of their models. So you might know that ChatGPT has got model 5.5 is released, or whatever the model number. And each time they've updated their models with, all sorts of technology, as well as the knowledge that they're getting and they're scraping from different websites, etc. So that's what we mean when we talk about a knowledge base. And each base has knowledge based up to a certain point. And in some cases, you might find when you do a search, or you ask a chatbot for information, it might say, I don't have that information, because you haven't activated it to go search something more recent, given a date for it to look at. And some of them are, like I said, restricted over where they're getting their information from. Very large publications might have not licensed all of their content. Maybe they didn't give them the archives, they only gave them the last year. We don't know, but assuming that might be the case, the information that model has is only restricted to a certain amount of archival information. So that's what we're talking about with crawlers.
Yeah, even there's I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a model that was released that was trained on news and information up to I think like 1939 or something that was publicly available. And so it's almost like a time warp when you try and ask questions to this particular model because
That's right.
it only has information and is only trained on information up until that point in time, which is
Right.
um, really kind of telling in a lot of ways about how much the type of information that it has available to it when it's training really does inform what the outputs are, right? Um,
Yeah.
so cutoff dates, I think I was having a conversation with Claude in preparation for this conversation. And it seems that as the models are released more frequently these days, the cutoff dates on the training knowledge and information is getting shorter and shorter. Does that sound right to you?
That's what we
Asking that
found. I
question.
mean, it's again hard to know. Um, we don't know. And I think the issue here is that the voter isn't aware and doesn't know. They don't know about knowledge base, web crawlers, etc. And even when I go in and I ask a question or I'm inside a chatbot, I'm not thinking, how do I skew this? How do I manage this prompt question so that it gives me the information I need? I'm not thinking that. I mean, the best as I can. And this is where we're really seeing the change, right? Voters are shifting from searching to conversing. They're not just putting in a candidate name or an issue. They're actually asking the question, where does this candidate where does this candidate stand on my issue? Who are the candidates in my district that are, running tomorrow that I have to vote for? So that's where we really need to make sure that the information that we're providing from our websites and getting out into the digital sphere is going to be picked up by these bots and synthesized in a way that answers these questions.
So, I guess what I'm hearing from you then is that there are a bunch of different ways that we can get information. So whether it's getting coverage through earned media, getting coverage through social channels and discussion, we can talk about that in a minute. And then, I mean, can you influence, can you control some of this with your own website? Like, where are the entry points for trying to put your information out there?
Yeah, I mean, all of those places. Really, this is what we're just finding out. And this is what surprised us, yesterday or the day before yesterday, Google came out with a whole new model and talking about how they are changing search because they obviously see that the opportunity, like you were saying at the beginning, that when people do a search in a search bot right now, Google, the first part that comes up is an AI result, right? It's synthesized information that it's grabbed. Again, we're not really sure from where, and in some cases there are citations. And that is the first information that a voter or a person sees, a user sees when they actually do something in Google search. And Google has now said, we're going to expand that even more. We're going to take that information and synthesize it so that you, as the user, don't have to go click into websites and ask more questions. You can get that information right here. So that's changing and evolving the way we, as the info providers, is putting out and putting our information and making it available. So there are a few ways, like I said, that are evolving. And interesting to us is that the website is now the hub again. In the early days of the internet, it was all about the web and the website, and now it kind of went all over the place. And now it's come back because the website is seen as somewhat of an informative, factual, validated domain, so to speak. So once you have a domain, we hope that it has been cleared and vetted and that you have registered your domain and you pay the dues, etc., and membership, and that is a factual spot for the AI bot to find information. So if your candidate or issue is the name of your website, that would be one of the first places that your AI bot would find that information, would go to look for that information. So what you want to make sure, and we can go into more detail on this, but that your website is optimized for that. Again, back to the GEO. What does that mean? The technology stand behind that you need to do, as well as other parts of the internet, digital spheres, where you can make sure that this content, your content, is found by the bots. So that's where you start.
I'm curious though, if we're getting found by the bots, like the website has traditionally been optimized. I think when we look at a website, we're like, oh, that's pretty and visually interesting for a human to read. But there's a lot more going on behind the pretty images on a website, right?
So there's coding that that you need to really do to make sure the bots are picking you up, and that's an LLM.txt file that needs to be created. And we have, we to our clients, we offer ways to optimize the site. And again, this comes back to the GEO and how the bot is looking for this information, how it's crawling, how does a bot think? Well, it thinks in very logical way. It wants to see very bullet points. It wants to see factual information, very clear and easy, so that it can synthesize and as it actually synthesizes and spits out to the user. So the simpler that your information is available, the easier it is for the bot to see. And that's a little bit counter to what we do in SEO, because with search engine optimization, it was all about making sure the keywords were all over your page, all over your website. You wanted to have specific keywords. If you had an issue, you want to make sure it was, presented every way possible. And that's still something that we want to make sure is still part of your planning and your website development, because the AEO as SEO and GEO work together, because it's like you're talking the language of the computer world. The technology world is looking for other technology information. So as the bot is searching for information about your candidate or issue, it's going to go to places that it recognizes the technology that it's looking for. So having a website that's optimized for SEO, that does have these keywords and is formatted and such, is definitely helpful. It's like the ground base that you want to have. And then you want to build on that with the GEO technology and the coding, as well as the formatting of the headlines and information that you're putting out.
Hmm. And then, so that's kind of your owned channel. Are there any other kind of channels within the owned space that's worth thinking about?
Right. So what we found through our research, and what I see is also a lot of people have found, is that many, if not all of the bots, are really relying on what they deem as factual websites and platforms. And in this case, I'm talking about Wikipedia, talking about Reddit and YouTube. These are large platforms which the bots are actually using to source information to help synthesize its findings. So in the case of Wikipedia, well, why Wikipedia? Wikipedia is like the ground truth to information in this space, because the information on Wikipedia is vetted and cited, right? They work very hard to make sure that it is independently cited, and you can get really caught up if your information is not, right? They will take it down, the page will be restricted, etc. So that's one place. And again, if you think about how Wikipedia is formatted, it's very simple. It's, exactly the different areas on each page. So again, it's speaking the tech language to the AI bot. And interesting on Reddit, Reddit is user-based, and users, there's so much information. It's so large that the bots are looking to Reddit because it has in most cases, very up-to-date information. Users are there and they're conversing, right? There's usually quite a bit of back and forth inside each one of the Reddit pages and sections. And so it's easy, again, for the bot to source out information looking at Reddit, because again, it's very simple. If you go in there, it almost looks old school the way it's laid out, right? There's a question, people are talking, and there's a very easy header to understand. So that's another way that the bots are citing, using it to cite for information and synthesizing with the other information. And YouTube, because it's massive, right? We know that is the largest space of information right now. It's also full of disinformation. And this is where the bot and the information that the bots are synthesizing, how does it synthesize this information? And what kind of biases does it know and take from the information it's receiving from these places? So that's one of the parts of the studies we looked at, and trying to understand how it actually spits out this information to the user.
Okay. And then in terms of like that, then you've got your more kind of traditional media outlets, if it has arrangements with it. Is that true on the training side and on the post-training search side?
Yes, it's exactly. So again, we don't have access to understanding what the licensing agreements for all these different publications are, but we know that ChatGPT, OpenAI, and Anthropic, and they've all done, and Grok, they've all done different agreements with different publication media companies, and some are, as we know, involved with media companies. So there is, the possibility of potential skewing or manipulation of content and information.
So what does that look like though? Like, say you're a state rep candidate and you're probably not going to get picked up by Axios or the New York Times, and you've got your website, maybe there's a little bit of Reddit, probably your Wikipedia page is a little thin, right? What does all that mean to you and to your clients? Does that mean that your website is that much more important?
Well, yes. All of that information is important, right? All the information you put out there is important. The more information that's cited and vetted and published is going to give your content more value to the AI bot. So it's going to see it as that, oh, people are talking about this. Publications are writing about this information, about what your candidate said, about what your issue has been about it. It looks like it's relevant right now. It's written, publications have been reporting about it recently. So again, it values that information. So if you have a candidate that has a website and maybe they've done one or two speeches, you can use that information and carve it up into a million different ways of content and putting it out there on Substack, on LinkedIn, creating video, putting it up on YouTube, creating clips for social media, making sure that Reddit, that Reddit is well informed about your candidate's, stance on information on different issues. So all of those places, it's not one and done anymore. It's definitely not just a website anymore. You need to be able to put it out everywhere so that it's available to the bots to scrape wherever they are.
So it sounded like there's still you need quality coverage from reputable news sources and things, but there's also just sheer quantity of content is increasingly important.
Yeah, and I will say that I've recently done some just quick, research myself, where I put in a question about an issue on all of the bots, and just to see what they come back with. And most of them do come back with information that's cited. And when they don't, it's because they're pulling from their knowledge base. But in most cases, you'll see a little link where you can click to see, well, where did this come from? How's this information brought forth? And in a lot of cases, especially around candidates in specific states and districts, it will cite local publications, which is awesome, right? Because for a long time, we were talking about these news deserts, which there, of course, certainly are. But it's so important that this information is available, because the bots will pick it up. If it's relevant and it makes sense to what your query is, it will pick it up.
So let's go to the inverse. If you're not in all of these spaces, what the chatbot is still going to give some answer, right? So what is the risk of not doing and engaging in GEO?
Well, you're going to be invisible eventually. I mean, it'll rely on the knowledge base. And then worst case scenario, it'll rely on what others are writing about your candidate or your issue. So if your opponent is all optimized, that's what it's going to pick up. It's going to know that your opponent is out there talking and making statements and getting news stories, etc. So that's the risk. And the same thing with having, the old days of having websites with easy PDFs for people to download. And, it's harder for the bots to see anything behind a wall and PDFs, etc. So it's handy to have the PDFs. Don't not have them because of course they're great for journalists and for users who want to read up and download things, but also have it as a very easy HTML, text markup available on your website.
Yeah, I get in, or Elena and I kind of have an ongoing, if folks aren't familiar, our executive director, but we have spent a lot of time developing the AAPC deepfake compliance guide. So I think the darn thing is upwards of like 60 or 70 pages in a PDF now because it's a 50 state compliance guide. And but what I've realized is that because it's behind a member paywall and it's a PDF, there's a lot of substantive policy work that has gone into this document that is really only for the eyes of those people who decide to download and view the PDF and not getting picked up for the larger kind of policy conversations that might be happening. And then even more so, if you've got, I think about from the public affairs perspective, I've spoken with a number of folks that we run into how if you've got that staff member that you're about to walk in and talk to, and they probably just 5 minutes before you walked in the office said, what do I need to know about this issue?
Yeah.
You want it giving your talking points essentially, and not the other guys, or not just something that looks like, it came out of a black box.
Exactly. No, and that's like I said, that's what really surprised us when we went down this long, large rabbit hole of where is this information coming from and how do we make sure that the information we need to get seen is put out there. So it's imperative that people are taking this seriously because it's, as you know, I mean, it's moving so fast. And even from when, we first put out this study in February to now, I mean, the world is quickly changing.
Um, yes. I mean, to that point, I mean, do you think it's going to look different just in October of 26 or even, goodness, what could 2028 information
Yeah.
landscape look like?
Well, I think it's possible this could be, you know, like the first election, the midterms election really about people who are really getting all their information from an AI bot and not from a website or from other channels. I mean, I think obviously social media is a big part of what's happening and how people are ingesting information and news right now in small clips, etc. But I think when people are searching and they're talking to their phones or to Alexa or Siri, they're asking questions. You're right. So it's a dialogue. It's no longer just a quick look and quick Google search for keywords. It's actually having a dialogue with the bots and the information. So I think this is going to be the first time we're going to see that kind of election, and we'll see what kind of outcome that brings.
And do you think, I keep thinking about the different channels that we're going to see AI in terms of voter contact, and you kind of have you have the GEO, then you have I'm going to put a chatbot in your text message. There's the paid advertising. We'll see if OpenAI ever opens that to political. Um, uh, but do you foresee people spending more time with their own kind of LLM of choice, or is it that folks are going to go out and interact with somebody else's chatbot?
That's a good question. I think again, with the recent news from Google and from the other technology companies, they're certainly making it easier for the average person to create a chatbot, their own chatbot, and also creating what they call agents, right? Which are the ways for the bots to be able to search and create tasks behind the scenes, and then do research and then come back and give it to you in the format that you are asking for. So yeah, this is going to be an interesting way to see what kind of chatbots people create and how they make them available, and what the knowledge base is for those. But I think to the average user, it's kind of like Kleenex right now. Chat GPT is the Kleenex of the bots. That's what they've heard of. That's what they know. Grok is certainly a big part of the Elon Musk sphere, and getting a lot of attention. It reminds me a little bit of back in the early days of the browsers when they were launched. I'm that old to remember when they launched Netscape, and we didn't have browsers. And Internet Explorer and AOL and Yahoo, and there was a real browser fight, right? There was a lot of competition to who was going to own that space, and I feel like we're really in that right now. You're already seeing deals between the different tech companies to sharing data centers and information gathering. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, but it's going to probably play out a lot faster than the browser wars did.
Yeah, they're still laying the railroad tracks, so to
True.
speak. Yeah. I go back to the search wars when I was an Alta Vista girl for many, many
Oh
moons.
yeah, sure. Ask Jeeves too. Yeah.
Well, this has just been an incredible conversation. We could talk on and on, but I think we're coming up on our wrap-up time. But thank you so much, Mary. If you could impress upon anybody from this conversation at this moment in time, given that nothing is going to be evergreen these days, like what's kind of your big picture? Like, where are we at this moment with this technology?
Obviously still very early days. And I feel that from a political perspective, public affairs perspective, you can't keep up on everything. I mean, there are tools that are out there now. So many different firms and organizations are offering all different ways to check on, how you check where your GEO is and things like that. It's the best is gonna rise to the top, right? It's gonna bubble up to the top, and you could go crazy trying to keep up on all of it. I think if you really want to keep up, is consistently look at each one of these chatbots and search, put in a prompt that asks, what do you know about, or why should I vote for X candidate, and see what it comes up with. I mean, this is how we test search engines back in the olden days too. Where do I come up in search? What page am I coming up on? That type of thing. So once you see that, you'll be able to see, well, oh my gosh, the opponent is getting all this ink here on the page, and you'll really know that you need to get out there more and get the information, available, put out in all those places.
And you make a good point, because even if you are not doing it, your client is, and they're going to want to know where they come up in those answers. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Mary. It was great to have you join us.
Yeah, thank you. Good to see you.
You too.
You've been listening to the AAPC's The Future of Political Consulting podcast, featuring Julie Sweet in conversation with Mary Albert from Dewey Square, discussing GEO, AI search, and the future of political communications strategy. You can find more podcast conversations on the issues shaping campaigns, advocacy, and the political consulting industry on the AAPC website. Thank you for listening.